Find a comfortable position, let your body relax, take one slow breath in, and let it go. There is nowhere you need to be right now, nothing to do. Just rest and let the story carry you gently away. Indus Valley Sleep Story, V3 Plus Framework. Close your eyes. There was once a civilization larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. It stretched across an area the size of Western Europe. It had cities with populations of 40,000 people. Streets laid in perfect grids, buildings made from standardized bricks, and a sewage system so advanced that most of Europe would not match it for another 4,000 years. You have almost certainly never heard of it. The Indus Valley Civilization, also called Harappan, also called by the people who study it simply the mystery. Because here is what we know. They existed. They built. They traded. They counted and weighed and measured with extraordinary precision. They made art and toys and jewelry and boats. And then around 1900 BCE they were gone. No invasion found. No great fire. No plague recorded in the bones. Just empty streets and the wind moving through doorways where no one would ever stand again. Tonight, you're going to walk those streets before they emptied. Tonight, you are arriving at Mohenjo-daro, the largest city of the Indus Valley, at the moment of its absolute peak. The year is somewhere around 2500 BCE. The city is alive. The air smells of river mud and wood smoke and baked grain. Somewhere nearby, a child is laughing. Find a comfortable position now. Let your body settle. Take one slow breath in through your nose, hold it gently, and release. You do not need to understand everything tonight. You only need to arrive, to walk slowly, to let this world build itself around you, detail by detail, until it is more real than the ceiling above you. The Indus River is just to the west. You can hear it, a low, deep sound like the earth breathing. It has been here for 10,000 years. It will be here long after every name is forgotten. You take your first step into the city. The path beneath your feet is made of fired brick, each one exactly the same size as all the others. Archaeologists will note this 4,000 years from now with something approaching disbelief. Every brick in Mohenjo-daro is the same. Every street runs at 90 degrees to the others. Someone planned this city before a single wall was raised. Whoever they were, they thought carefully about the future. Around you, the city hums with the sound of early morning. Carts loaded with grain move along the wide central road. A potter carries a stack of redware bowls, steady as a dancer. Two merchants argue quietly over a set of small stone weights, each one a perfect cube. You breathe the air. It smells like dust and warm bread and river water. You are in the most advanced city on earth, and no one in Greece, no one in Rome, no one in the future will remember its name for 4,000 years. A guide finds you at the city gate, a young woman carrying a clay tablet pressed with small square symbols. She does not speak your language, but she does not need to. She gestures, "Follow me," and walks. You follow. The streets of Mohenjo-daro are not like the streets of any other ancient city you might imagine. There is no chaos here, no market stalls spilling into the road, no animals wandering where they should not. The main boulevard is 12 meters wide enough for two carts to pass each other with room to spare. Side streets branch off at perfect right angles. Every corner is a 90-degree turn. This was designed, not discovered, not grown organically over centuries the way most ancient cities did, slowly, stumbling forward, one house leaning against the next. Mohenjo-daro was drawn before it was built. The streets were planned. The drainage was planned. Even the size of the bricks was standardized across the entire civilization. The same ratio of length to width to height, from the southernmost city to the northernmost, across 1,000 kilometers. Someone sat down and decided how a city should work, and then they built it that way. The woman leads you along a side street. The houses here are 2 stories tall, some 3. The walls are thick, made of kiln-fired brick rather than the sun-dried mud brick of Egypt or Mesopotamia. Kiln-fired bricks are harder, more uniform, more permanent. They also require far more fuel to produce. Whoever built this city had access to enormous amounts of timber and a reason to use it on permanence. They were building for the long term. You pass a doorway and glance inside. The room beyond is cool and dim. Against one wall is a storage shelf. Against another, a hearth. In the corner, a large ceramic jar for water. Everything is in its place. There is a tidiness here, not the bare tidiness of poverty, but the deliberate order of people who have thought carefully about where things should go. Through a gap in the wall, you can see into a small courtyard. A woman is grinding grain. The sound is rhythmic, low, almost like breathing. Beside her, a toddler plays with a small clay cart that has 4 wheels that actually turn. The cart is painted red. The child is completely absorbed. You pause and watch. The woman grinding grain does not look up. The child does not notice you. The courtyard smells of warm dough and something floral, perhaps a plant growing in a clay pot near the courtyard wall. You have traveled 4,000 years and arrived in an ordinary Tuesday morning. This is what you always forget about ancient civilizations. Between the temples and the kings and the monuments, most of human life was this. A woman grinding grain, a child with a toy cart, the smell of something baking. The guide continues walking. You follow her deeper into the city. The street narrows slightly here and then opens again. The urban planners allowed for variation within their grid, pockets of shade and width, small recesses where a cart can wait while another passes. Even the chaos is managed. You hear water somewhere ahead. The Great Bath of Mohenjo-daro is the oldest public water structure ever found. That is not speculation. That is the consensus of every archaeologist who has stood where you are standing now. It is 12 meters long, 7 meters wide, and nearly 3 meters deep. It is lined with finely fitted brick, sealed with a layer of natural tar to make it watertight. Steps descend into the water from both ends. Along the sides, a series of private changing rooms open onto a walkway, small, curtained spaces where you can prepare before entering the water. The water itself is still, cool, a pale greenish blue in the early morning light. You stand at the edge and look in. The Great Bath is not an accident. It is not a luxury. Every detail of its construction, the waterproofing, the drainage system that allowed the bath to be emptied and refilled, the careful arrangement of changing rooms, suggests that bathing here was a serious matter, a ritual matter. Scholars believe this was a place of spiritual purification, not washing in the way you wash, washing in the way that mattered, the cleansing of something internal. Something the Harappans considered important enough to place at the very heart of their largest city, visible from the main road, accessible to all. There are no signs here indicating who can enter and who cannot, no markings of hierarchy, no section for the wealthy and section for the poor, just the water, the steps, and the silence. The woman standing next to you, an older woman, her gray hair tied back, her cotton wrap the color of undyed linen, steps out of her sandals and begins to descend the steps. She moves slowly. Her feet find each step without looking. She has done this before, many times. When the water reaches her chest, she pauses, closes her eyes, lifts her chin very slightly toward the pale sky above. You stand and watch the city move around the edge of this moment. A merchant passing on the road outside glances in and nods. A small acknowledgement, the way you might nod at someone praying. Further down the walkway, two young men sit talking quietly, waiting for the older woman to finish. Children are not running here. There is something about the space that communicates. Slow down. The air above the water is cooler than the street air. There is a faint smell of damp stone and something mineral, deep and clean, like water from a very old well. You realize you have been holding your shoulders tight. You let them drop. The older woman opens her eyes. She turns slowly in the water. She looks up at the sky once more, not at anything, just at the light. And then she begins to climb the steps, steady as the tide. You are in the oldest known public pool on Earth. Not a king's pool, not a temple pool for priests only. A public pool in a city of 40,000 people 4,500 years ago. Somewhere above you, through the open ceiling of sky, the same stars that watch this city are still there. They have been patient. The market of Mohenjo-daro is not loud the way you might expect a market to be. There are voices, yes, the low rhythm of bargaining, the sound of pottery being arranged on a mat, a merchant calling out, not aggressively, just announcing presence. But underneath all of it is a kind of order, a hum of practiced efficiency that feels less like a bazaar and more like a system that has been running smoothly for so long that everyone in it knows exactly what to do. You stop at a stall selling small stone weights. Each weight is a perfect cube or sphere, polished smooth, made from chert, a dense, uniform stone. The merchant, a compact man with careful eyes, holds one out to you on his palm. It is exactly 13.6 grams. You would not know that, but the merchant knows it. The buyer he is waiting for knows it. And in the city of Harappa, 400 kilometers to the north, a different merchant with different goods uses weights that are identical to these. Same stone, same shape, same ratios, same mass. The entire Indus Valley Civilization used a standardized system of weights and measures, from the southernmost settlement to the northernmost. This means there was coordination. There was enforcement, not necessarily through force, but through agreement, or through a shared understanding so deep it functioned like law. No other ancient civilization achieved this at this scale. You put the weight back. The merchant nods. Nearby, a woman is selling cotton cloth, woven in a tight pattern, dyed with indigo, deep blue violet. The Harappans were among the first people in the world to grow and weave cotton commercially. The cloth she is showing a customer is fine enough to feel cool against skin even in the heat of the day. The customer holds it up to the light. You can see the weave clearly, small, even, patient. Beside the cloth stall, a trader has spread out a selection of beads, carnelian, etched in white geometric patterns, lapis lazuli, deep blue, from mines in Afghanistan over 1,000 kilometers away, steatite, soft and gray, carved into tiny seals with animal motifs. Each bead is a small argument that the Harappans were not isolated. They traded across a world far larger than most of us imagine for a civilization this ancient. You pick up a carnelian bead. It is warm from sitting in the sun. The etching on its surface, a series of precise dots in a line. required a technique so refined it involved applying an alkaline solution to create the pattern before firing. Archaeologists spent years trying to reproduce the process. Most still cannot do it as cleanly as this. The bead was made by someone who trained for years, who cared about being precise, who wanted to create something that would last. You turn it over in your hand. The market continues around you, the weights and measures, the cotton and the beads, the grain and the copper, and the small terracotta animals sold to children near the eastern entrance. All of it moving slowly, all of it measured. You follow a narrow lane east of the market. The guide has disappeared somewhere in the crowd, but the city is logical enough that you cannot truly get lost. Every street leads back to a main avenue, and every main avenue eventually leads to the great bath at the center. The craftsman's quarter announces itself through sound before sight. A rhythmic tapping, metal on metal, then metal on stone. The hiss of something hot meeting something cool. A low voice counting, very quietly, in a language you cannot follow but whose rhythm is unmistakably the rhythm of someone in deep, deep concentration. The first workshop you pass is a coppersmith's. A man sits cross-legged on a low platform, working a piece of copper with a small hammer. On the floor around him, chisels, polishing stones, a clay mold in two halves. Finished pieces hang on a cord along the wall. Small copper figurines, flat copper fish hooks, a flat copper blade sharp enough to reflect your face back at you. The copper came from Rajasthan, 200 kilometers to the east. The craftsman acquired it through a trader who travels between cities, moving goods along the river system and the network of paths connecting the settlements. This is not a local economy. It is a regional one, possibly an intercontinental one. You pause at the next workshop. A woman here works with shell, conch shell from the Gulf of Kutch on the coast 400 kilometers south. She is cutting it into bangles, each one a wide, smooth circle that will sit on a wrist. The sound of her cutting tool against the shell is a high, thin hiss. She does not look up. The bangles she makes will be found, 4,000 years later, still on the wrists of the women buried in the cemetery outside the city. Close-fitting, layered, worn until the last moment. You move further into the lane. A beadmaker here works with a small drill, its tip a sliver of flint, rotated by a bow whose string wraps the shaft. He is drilling through a carnelian bead no larger than your thumbnail. The drill hole must be perfectly centered, or the bead will crack. He works without hurrying. He has done this 10,000 times, perhaps more. His finished beads sit in a clay dish beside him, sorted by size. The smallest are barely 2 millimeters across. The etching on each one is done freehand, a series of precise white dots on deep red stone, created using a chemical process that no other ancient civilization appears to have discovered independently. You sit on a low stone step across the lane and watch. The beadmaker drills, the shell cutter cuts, the coppersmith taps. The afternoon light comes at a low angle into the lane and makes the copper pieces glow. No one speaks to you. No one seems to notice you particularly. You are simply a person sitting in a lane, watching people work. In a city of 40,000, people have learned that strangers are merely future neighbors. The quiet is almost musical. Near the center of the city, there is a wall where seals are sometimes pressed into wet clay for record keeping. Trade receipts, ownership marks, messages between merchants and administrators. You stop here without quite knowing why. A seal maker is working at a table nearby. He is carving a steatite seal, small enough to fit in your palm, soft enough to carve with a copper tool, hard enough after firing to press into clay 10,000 times without losing its sharpness. On the face of the seal, in reverse relief, is a short-horned bull standing with enormous dignity beneath a script of small square symbols. You count the symbols. 5, sometimes 6, rarely more than 17 in any inscription ever found. The Indus script is the most tantalizing unsolved mystery in the ancient world. More than 4,000 inscriptions have been found, on seals, on pottery, on small copper tablets, on a bronze tool. They appear everywhere in the Indus Valley and nowhere else. Scholars have studied them since 1875. Computers have analyzed their frequency patterns. Linguists have proposed over 100 decipherment attempts. None has succeeded. We do not know what language this script represents. We do not know if it reads left to right or right to left, though most signs suggest right to left. We do not know if it is a full writing system or a limited notation, a way of recording names, goods, and quantities rather than full sentences. We do not know if it was an elite system or a widely shared one. We know the symbols, we know their frequency, we know how they combine. But what they say, what thought, what name, what law, what story, what prayer is completely silent. You watch the sealmaker carve another symbol. He works with quiet certainty. He knows exactly what he is writing. It is meaningful to him, has the specificity of words that matter, words attached to value or name or truth. And in 4,000 years, not a single person alive will be able to tell you what it says. This is the strange grief of the Indus Valley. A civilization that left us so much, so many cities, so many objects, so many careful measurements, but not a single story we can read. Not a king's name, not a god's prayer, not a law, not a love letter. Somewhere in those 17 symbols might be the answer to how they govern themselves. Somewhere might be a name for the river or for the city or for the god they bathed before in the great bath. But the symbols sit in their museums around the world, quiet as stones, patient as graves, waiting for someone who will never come. Unless you look at the seal maker's hands. He is finishing now. He blows the stone dust away with a single breath. He holds up the seal to examine it. In the evening light, it is very beautiful. He sets it down and picks up a piece of wet clay and presses the seal firmly, evenly into it. The symbols appear in reverse, raised from the clay surface, waiting to be read. You climb a ramp to the elevated citadel, the raised mound at the western edge of Mohenjo-daro that overlooks the lower city. From here, the city is extraordinary. You can see the grid of streets, the curve of the river, the flat rooftops where people have set out grain to dry in the afternoon sun. Smoke rises from cooking fires in a dozen courtyards. Children run between houses in the lower quarter. A man sits alone on a rooftop, not doing anything in particular, just sitting. And you realize, standing here on the highest point in the city, that something is missing. In Egypt, you would see a palace, a temple larger than everything around it, the house of a god, or the house of a man who called himself a god. In Mesopotamia, a great ziggurat would tower over everything, and at its summit the priests would perform the rituals that kept the world aligned with divine will. In Rome, you would see a forum, a capitol, the architecture of power, columns that say, someone important made a decision here, and that decision affected everyone below. But in Mohenjo-daro, from the highest point in the city, you see no palace, no throne room, no great hall where a king receives tribute, no monument to a conqueror, no temple with a larger-than-life statue of a deity who demands obedience. The citadel you are standing on contains the great bath, A large building that may have been a granary or assembly hall. Some smaller structures, residential, perhaps administrative, nothing that shouts power, nothing that intimidates. Who ruled this city? 40,000 people, a sophisticated economy, standardized weights from one end of the civilization to the other, cities built to a plan. All of this required coordination, required someone or something to make decisions and enforce them. But the archaeology finds no one. No burial site has been found that is dramatically richer than others. No gold-laden tomb, no royal grave with servants buried alongside. The cemeteries of the Indus Valley are notably egalitarian. People buried with their personal belongings, yes, but without the vast hoards of wealth that mark elite burials in Egypt or Mesopotamia. No statue has been found that appears to be a ruler, only the mysterious priest-king figurine, small and quiet, more suggestive of authority than the screaming stone proclamations of other civilizations. So who made the decisions? Who coordinated the brickmakers? Who ensured the weights matched from Harappa to Mohenjo-daro to the settlements in Gujarat? Maybe some scholars have begun to suggest it was not a who, maybe it was a what. But the answer to that question is still 4,000 years away from you. For now, you stand on the highest point in the greatest city on earth and look out over a world that organized itself without a pharaoh, without a conqueror, without a name written in 10-meter letters on the wall of a palace. Just streets and grain and people going about Tuesday morning, and the river moving west as it always has. The large building on the citadel, the one you could not quite classify from the outside, turns out to be, at least in part, a place for storing grain. You walk into it now. The interior is cool and dim, the walls thick enough to keep the summer heat out. Along the sides, rows of large ceramic jars stand full of grain, wheat and barley and sesame, the staples of the Indus diet. Workers move in and out with measured efficiency, carrying smaller vessels that they fill from the larger jars and carry out to the distribution points in the lower city. This was a managed food supply, not a king's pantry, not a temple's sacred reserve. A city's emergency supply, enough grain to feed tens of thousands of people through a monsoon failure or a difficult season. This is infrastructure. This is the same thinking that built the drainage system. If we plan for the worst, we will survive it. The Harappans understood, very early, something that took most civilizations centuries more to learn: that a city is only as stable as its food supply. That the difference between a settlement and a civilization is often nothing more complicated than grain storage. You run your hand along the surface of one of the large jars. The clay is smooth and cool. The jar is sealed with a cloth tied at the neck. The cloth smells faintly of grain dust and sesame oil. Somewhere in this building, records are being kept. Clay tablets pressed with the Indus script note what came in and what went out. The weights and measures you saw in the market are here too. Official ones, the standard against which the market's weights are checked. Everything here speaks of a system, of decisions made not for tomorrow but for 5 years from now. A woman with a stylus and a small clay tablet moves between the jars, making marks. She does not look up as you pass. She is counting. The numbers she is writing are in a system we have not fully decoded, but the act of writing them is unmistakably the act of someone who takes quantity seriously, who knows that what is not counted cannot be managed. You think of the city outside, the streets, the bath, the market, and you understand suddenly that none of it works without this room. The beautiful standardized bricks, the perfect grid, The carnelian beads traded across 1,000 kilometers. All of it rests on the boring and essential truth that people need to eat, and someone has to make sure they do. The Harappans built their civilization on competence rather than glory. They did not build pyramids to the sky. They built drainage systems and grain stores and public baths. They built to keep people alive and comfortable and clean. Maybe that is why, when their civilization finally came to an end, it left so little destruction. No great burning, no mass graves, just a well-administered system that slowly, quietly, for reasons we still argue about, wound down. But that is thousands of years from now. For the moment, the grain jars are full, and the woman with the stylus is still counting, and outside, the city continues. You follow a family home as the afternoon light softens. The house is 2 stories. The ground floor has 3 rooms. A front room that opens onto the street, used for receiving visitors, perhaps for small-scale trade. A larger central room, and a kitchen at the back. The kitchen has a hearth set into the floor, a storage shelf for pottery, and a small drain in the floor that connects to the city's drainage system. The drain in the kitchen floor connects to the main sewer. Let that settle for a moment. In 2500 BCE, in a city of 40,000 people, the house you are standing in has indoor plumbing. The kitchen drains to the street drain to the main channel to the outskirts of the city. Every house in the lower city has this, not palaces, not temples, houses. For context, the city of Edinburgh, Scotland did not have a working sewer system until 1866, nearly 4,000 years after Mohenjo-daro. The woman who lives here, a woman in her 40s, practical and unhurried, is preparing the evening meal. She is making flatbread from barley flour, cooking it on a flat clay griddle over the hearth. The smell is immediate and warm, the smell of bread cooking, which is the same smell in every century and on every continent, the smell of someone taking care of people. Her husband sits in the front room shaping something from copper, a small tool, a fish hook or stylus. 2 children sit near him, nominally helping, actually competing over a small toy cart. The older child, maybe 8, holds the cart above the younger child's reach with theatrical cruelty. The younger child, maybe 5, is not fooled and simply waits. The husband glances over and says something. The older child lowers the cart with elaborate reluctance. The younger child takes it and begins rolling it across the brick floor, making a low rumbling sound with his mouth. You are watching an argument about a toy that is indistinguishable from an argument about a toy in any family, in any century. The second floor, accessible by a brick staircase, is the sleeping area. Small windows set high in the wall allow air to move through while keeping the room cool. There are sleeping mats rolled and stored along one wall, a small shelf for personal items, combs made from shell, a copper pin, a small clay figurine of a woman with an elaborate headdress. The figurine is painted red and black, precise and dignified. In the cemetery outside the city, archaeologists will find these figurines buried with women, alongside their bangles, their beads, their tools. Personal items, evidence that what mattered to them in life mattered enough to accompany them beyond it. You sit on the low windowsill of the upper floor and look out over the city as evening comes. The streets below are settling into quieter rhythms. Carts are returning. Smoke rises from 100 kitchens. The river catches the last light and holds it briefly, pale and gold. The woman downstairs calls the children. The older child goes immediately. The younger finishes one more roll of the toy cart and then goes, cart in hand, still making the rumbling sound with his mouth. After the meal, you walk the streets in the early evening. The city is cooler now, the brick walls releasing the heat they absorbed through the day in a slow, steady warmth that feels almost like a living thing. Along the side of the street, covered with flat stones, runs a drain. You know it is there because you have been told. But you would not necessarily notice it. The drain cover is flush with the street surface, the stone joints tight, the whole system invisible unless you know where to look. Lift one of the flat stones. Below it, a brick-lined channel, sloping gently toward the main collector drain at the edge of the street. The channel is clean. The city employs people whose job is to keep the drains clear. Small inspection pits at regular intervals allow workers to check flow without dismantling the entire system. Every house in the lower city connects to this system. Every kitchen drain, every toilet, yes, toilets, in 2500 BCE, every washing area. The waste goes from the house to the street drain to the main channel to treatment areas at the edge of the city, where it is processed and channeled away from the water supply. This is not primitive sanitation. This is sanitation as a philosophy, the belief that managing human waste is a civic responsibility, not a private one, that the health of one household is connected to the health of all the others. In London, 1854, a cholera outbreak killed hundreds in the Soho district. A physician named John Snow traced it to a contaminated water pump on Broad Street and proved, for the first time in modern history, that disease spread through contaminated water. The Harappans understood this 4,000 years before John Snow. They never wrote it down in a way we can read. We do not know if they articulated the theory, but the drainage system is the theory, expressed in brick and mortar. It says, clean water in, dirty water out, and these two should never touch. Replace the stone cover. The street above is seamless. The system below is working perfectly. It has been working for 500 years already, and it will work for 500 more. You walk along the main drain to the edge of the residential district, where the covered channel becomes an open channel, then a treatment basin, then a controlled outflow into the lowland ground to the north of the city, far from the drinking water wells. A man is inspecting this outflow point with a clay lamp, checking flow, checking for blockages, making small marks on a tablet. His is a boring and essential job. The city does not know his name. The city does not need to. It needs his lamp and his tablet and his quiet attention. The river is visible from here, catching the last pink light of the sky. On its far bank, fields stretch south, wheat in neat rows, sesame, barley, date palms at the field edges, a few cows, unhurried. You breathe the evening air. It smells clean. Archaeologists have now excavated significant portions of Mohenjo-daro, Harappa, and dozens of smaller Indus Valley sites. They have cataloged hundreds of thousands of objects. They have found beads and bangles and pottery and copper tools and toy carts and weights and seals and figurines and combs and needles and grain and seeds and animal bones. They have not found weapons of war, not swords, not spears, not arrowheads designed for use against people, not helmets, not shields, not the mass graves that accompany conquest, not the burned districts that mark a city sacked and looted, not the defensive fortifications, thick walls, watchtowers, moats that tell you a city expected to be attacked. In the entire known archaeological record of the Indus Valley Civilization, which lasted over 1,000 years, which covered an area larger than any other civilization of its time, which included cities of tens of thousands of people, there is almost no direct evidence of organized warfare. Some scholars argue for caution here. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. There may be weapons we have not found. There may be conflicts we cannot see in the archaeology. The evidence is always incomplete, but the contrast remains striking. Egypt at this same time was building armies and recording conquests on temple walls in triumphant detail. Mesopotamia was at near constant war between city-states. The Indus Valley, larger than both, more populous than either, leaves us almost nothing comparable. No warrior king depicted on a victory stele. No chariot buried with a general. No children buried with arrowheads lodged in their bones. You walk through the lower city in the cooling evening and think about what this means. A civilization of 1 million people. By some estimates, at its peak, the Indus Valley may have contained 10% of the entire world population, that organized itself, traded across continents, built cities to a plan, managed food and water and waste for 1,000 years, without what most other civilizations considered essential, a military apparatus. Maybe they had a different solution to the problem of disagreement. Maybe the grid streets and the standardized weights and the civic drainage system are all evidence of the same thing. A society that preferred engineering problems over dominating neighbors. That found its identity in function rather than conquest. Or maybe, and this is the version that keeps historians up at night, we simply have not found the weapons yet. You pass a group of men sitting at the edge of the street, playing a game with small stone pieces on a flat board marked with squares. The game is animated but quiet. Someone wins a piece. Someone argues the rule. Someone points to the ground. Look, that is not the line. And everyone leans in to look at the ground. Then they resume. The evening deepens around them. The drains run clean. The grain stores are full. No army moves on the horizon. For now. Near the river docks on the western edge of the city, a boat has arrived from the south. It is a flat-bottomed river craft, wide and low, its deck covered with goods wrapped in cloth and stacked in ceramic jars sealed with clay stoppers pressed with the owner's seal. Sailors unload the cargo with practiced ease, their skin dark from months on the river, their movements the economical movements of people who have done this particular work for years. The city's port was not a port the way we might imagine one. No great harbor with monumental gates. Just a series of loading platforms along the bank, brick-paved, with channels cut to allow floodwater to drain. Functional, again. Always functional. But the goods arriving on this boat are anything but ordinary. Shell from the Gulf of Kutch, the conch shell used by the craftswomen in the bangle workshop. It came from the coast 400 kilometers south, traded up the river by intermediaries who know the waterways the way you know the roads of your own neighborhood. Lapis lazuli from Badakhshan in what is now northeastern Afghanistan. The stone traveled over 1,000 kilometers through mountain passes and trading settlements before arriving here, wrapped in cloth, sealed in a ceramic jar, ready to be made into beads that will be traded again, possibly as far as Mesopotamia, where Indus Valley seals have been found in the ruins of Ur. Mesopotamia. The Sumerians, at this exact period, were writing the early verses of what would eventually become the Epic of Gilgamesh. They traded with a people they called Meluha, a name that most scholars now believe refers to the Indus Valley. They wrote about Meluhan wood and Meluhan copper and Meluhan carnelian. The Sumerians, in other words, knew the Harappans, traded with them, wrote their name down. We have the Sumerian name, we do not have the Harappan name for themselves. We do not know what they called their cities. We do not know what they called their river. We do not know what they called each other. A dock worker near you sets down a jar and breaks the clay seal. He opens the cloth wrapping. Inside, copper ingots, raw and rough, from the Rajasthan mines. He notes the weight on a small clay tablet, makes a mark against the seal impression, and passes the tablet to a colleague. Everything accounted for. You watch the boat being unloaded, object by object, each one recorded, each one adding to the extraordinary economy of a civilization that stretched from the mountains to the sea and touched, through its traders and its goods, a world far larger than most people imagine for a place 4,500 years old. The river catches a last stroke of light before the sun drops entirely. The dock workers begin to slow. The last jars are moved. The boat settles lower in the water, emptied. It will return south in 2 days, loaded with Mohenjo-daro's exports, finished beads, cotton cloth, copper tools, the carnelian bangles from the workshop, grain from the stores. The world will trade tonight as it always has. Night comes gradually to Mohenjo-daro. The city does not go dark all at once. Windows stay lit, small clay lamps burning sesame oil, warm and faintly smoky. Voices continue in courtyards. The soft sound of a string instrument, something plucked, slow and contemplative, drifts from somewhere in the residential quarter. You pass the house from earlier. The children are on the rooftop now, in the last of the warm evening air, watching the sky go from blue to violet to the first suggestion of stars. The younger child has the cart. He is rolling it along the low rooftop wall, making it go fast, then slow, then fast. The wheels, 4 terracotta wheels on 2 axles, the whole cart, small enough to hold in one hand, turn freely and smoothly. The cart was made by someone who understood that a toy works better when it actually works. That a child will play longer with a wheel that rolls than with a wheel that sticks. Archaeologists have found hundreds of these carts at Indus Valley sites. They are remarkably consistent in design. The same basic structure, the same freely turning wheels, across the entire civilization, from the northwestern settlements to the coastal cities in the south. This suggests not just trade in finished goods, but a shared culture, shared ideas about what children needed and what play looked like. The older child next to him is not playing with a cart. She is holding a small terracotta dog, a smooth, simple figure with a long snout and alert ears. She has positioned it on the wall and is giving it a voice, a low, serious narration of some private story. The dog is apparently investigating something on the far side of the wall that only she can see. In the cemetery outside the city, children were buried with their toys. Not because the archaeologists found the toys beside the children and assumed that is what they were, but because the toys were clearly placed there deliberately, positioned with care, in the way you place something that matters next to someone who mattered. A terracotta cart, or a small dog, or a monkey figurine with movable arms, placed in the earth beside a child who would not grow up to be a craftsman, or a merchant, or a seal cutter, or a dock worker, who was only ever in the end someone who had a toy. The older child's dog finishes its investigation and reports back. She nods seriously. The report is satisfactory. The younger child rolls the cart to the end of the wall and back. Above them, the stars are coming out one by one. The same stars that hang over every city in every century, over the Nile, over Mesopotamia, over the cities that will come after. The stars do not choose. They light everything equally. The river moves in the dark below the city. The grain stores hold. The drains run. The children are on the roof, and the toys are in their hands, and for now, that is the whole world. In a museum in New Delhi, there is a bronze figurine 10 centimeters tall. She is a young woman, a girl, really, perhaps 15 or 16, standing with her weight shifted to one hip in a pose of absolute, unself-conscious confidence. Her right hand rests on her hip. Her left arm, covered from wrist to shoulder with what appear to be bangles, the same shell bangles made in the workshop you visited, hangs at her side, relaxed. Her head is tilted slightly, chin lifted. Her hair is coiled in a knot at the back of her head. She is naked, except for the bangles. She is looking at you with an expression that, given that she was made 4,500 years ago, is astonishingly modern. Not the blank serenity of Egyptian statues. Not the formal power of Mesopotamian kings in stone. She looks like someone who has been caught mid-thought and is mildly amused by your surprise. She was found in 1926 in the ruins of Mohenjo-daro. She is called the Dancing Girl, though no one knows for certain if she danced, or what she was, or who she was. She might be a deity. She might be a temple dancer. She might be a wealthy woman's portrait commission. She might be a craftsman's attempt at something purely beautiful, a figure that interested him, a gesture that caught his eye one afternoon in the market and stayed with him. What is certain is that whoever made her was not making a symbol. They were making a person. The bronze casting technique used, lost wax casting, where the model is made in wax, covered in clay, fired until the wax melts out, then filled with molten metal, was technically sophisticated and required considerable skill. This was not a quick piece of work. Someone spent time on her, spent attention. You meet her tonight in Mohenjo-daro before she becomes a museum piece. She walks through the evening market, or someone very like her, with the same tilt of the head, the same weight on one hip, the same stack of bangles reaching to the shoulder. She pauses at a bead seller's stall and examines a string of carnelian. She holds it up to the lamp, decides against it, sets it down. She continues walking. You watch her go, and you feel, briefly, completely, the full, specific reality of a person in an ancient city who was never less than fully herself, who stood exactly as she wanted to stand, who tilted her head exactly as she meant to, 4,500 years ago. And tonight, in the Delhi Museum, the bronze figure stands in exactly that way, tilted head and all, looking at the tourists who file past and perhaps thinking, if bronze statues are permitted to think, that people have not changed very much at all. She is still waiting for someone to recognize the expression. The lamps are lit throughout the lower city now. Sesame oil burns clean and quiet, a small, steady flame that produces little smoke if the wick is trimmed right. Most households know how to trim it right. The light through doorways and high windows is warm amber, the same color as firelight in every century, the color that the human eye has been reading as safe and domestic since before cities existed at all. You find a place to sit on a low wall near the edge of a quiet square, a small open space between 4 residential blocks, too small to be a market, too large to be a courtyard. Perhaps it is simply a breathing space, a gap in the city that lets air move and children play and neighbors stop to speak without blocking the street. A woman across the square is spinning thread, a small spindle whorl rotating in one hand, the thread extending upward to raw cotton held in the other. The motion is continuous, practiced, almost mechanical, which means her attention is elsewhere. She is watching a child on the far side of the square and listening to a conversation happening inside a doorway to her right. The city sounds at night different than it does in the day. Less cart traffic, less the sound of tools and commerce, more voices, the specific quality of evening voices, which are lower and longer than daytime voices. Conversations that are allowed to trail off without conclusion, questions asked without urgency. Somewhere across the square, someone laughs, a single sudden laugh, complete in itself, and then it is quiet again. You let your shoulders drop. The brick wall you are sitting on is still warm from the day. The square is not empty, but it is unhurried. The woman spins. The child across the way has found something on the ground, a stone perhaps, or an insect, and is examining it with the absolute concentration of someone who is 4 years old and has discovered that the ground contains wonders. A man stops near you and sets down a heavy basket. He stretches his back, looks up at the sky where the stars are clear and very bright. Mohenjo-daro has no large fires, no industrial smoke to obscure them, and lets out a long breath that is not quite a sigh, more like a release, the release of a day completed. He picks up the basket again and walks on, and you realize this is what most of human life is. Not the great bath and the undeciphered script and the dancing girl and the mystery of the missing king. This, the woman spinning and the man stretching his back and the child looking at a stone and the lamp burning in the window and the city settling into its nighttime self. This is the part that does not make it into history books. This is the part that was always happening in every city in every century, while the dramatic things happen somewhere else. The child across the square holds up the stone to show someone. The someone responds, "Yes, very good, put it down now. It is time to come inside." The child looks at the stone once more, then puts it down carefully in exactly the spot where they found it, as if it might be important to someone else who comes along later. Near the citadel, in a room that may have been an administrative office or a place of minor ceremony, you find a man sitting alone. He is perhaps 50, older than most people you have seen today, which in this world already makes him remarkable. He wears a robe of fine cotton printed with a cloverleaf pattern in deep red and white. One shoulder is bare. His head is shaved, except for a braid that falls behind one ear. Around his forehead, a band of cloth, and set into the cloth at the center of his brow, a single flat amulet, a circle of carved soapstone. He is not doing anything in particular. He is simply sitting with his hands resting on his knees, in a posture of such complete self-possession that you feel you have entered something, not a room, but a state of mind. The archaeologists who found a carved stone bust of someone very like him in 1927 called it the Priest King. It is one of the most enigmatic objects in all of ancient archaeology. The trefoil robe, the headband, the armband, the half-closed eyes that seem to be looking at something slightly beyond the visible world. He is not a king. There appears to be no king. He may not even be a priest in any sense we would recognize, but he is clearly someone of significance, someone who carries authority not through height or gold or the screaming declarations of a victory still, but through stillness, through presence. You stand at the doorway and he becomes aware of you without appearing to move. He does not beckon you in. He does not turn away. He simply includes you in the room, the way a very still body of water includes a stone that falls into it, not ignoring it, not reacting dramatically, just acknowledging the new reality. You sit on the low step inside the doorway. The lamp between you gives a steady light. His face in the lamplight is the face of someone who has decided a long time ago what matters and what does not. and has since found the whole exercise of deciding remarkably peaceful. Maybe he is a ritual specialist, someone who performs ceremonies that maintain the city's relationship with whatever forces the Harappans believed governed the rains, the river, the harvest. Maybe he is an administrator, someone who maintains the city's relationship with its own functioning systems, a kind of civic guardian. Maybe, in a civilization that left no royal tomb and no palace and no war monument, he is the closest thing to a leader that this world produces. Someone who is followed not because he commands it, but because in his presence, following seems reasonable. You do not speak. He does not speak. The lamp burns between you. After a while, you cannot say how long, he closes his eyes fully, and his breathing deepens, and you understand that you are simply sharing a room with someone who has learned how to rest. You learn from the example. The city outside is very quiet now. The rains begin without warning. One moment the sky above Mohenjo-daro is clear, stars visible, a half moon, the Milky Way a faint smear of silver above the river, and then the pressure changes. The air, which has been warm and dry, becomes something else, heavier, charged, smelling of distant water and stone. And then it is raining, not lightly. The South Asian monsoon does not arrive quietly. It arrives as a fact, sudden, total, transforming the world in the time it takes to take a breath. The streets of the city, so carefully engineered, begin to channel the water immediately. The drains, designed for this, activate as if the rain had pressed a switch. Water moves off the flat rooftops, through spouts into the street channels, into the covered drains, out to the collection basins beyond the city boundary. The system works. It has always worked. You stand in a doorway and watch the rain fall on the brick streets and disappear into the channels as if the city is drinking. The air smells clean in the sudden sharp way of rain after heat, the smell called petrichor, which is the word for the scent of earth after rain, which is the same word and the same smell in every language in every century. The family across the square has come inside. The woman who was spinning is gone. The street is empty of people, but not of motion. The rain moves. The water moves. The lamps and windows burn steadily behind closed wooden shutters. The Harappans built for the monsoon. They knew it was coming. It had been coming every year for centuries, for millennia. The drainage system, the thick walls, the flat roofs with their water spouts, the grain stores with their elevated floors, all of it is a response to the knowledge that water will fall and water will rise. And the question is not whether you can stop it, but whether you can accommodate it. They could. But there is a version of this story, a future version, still centuries away, where the monsoon does not accommodate them, where the rains come later each year, or differently, or not at all for seasons at a time, where the great Saraswati River, the sacred river of the Vedas, which once flowed alongside the Indus, gradually dries and shifts, leaving fields without water and trade routes without passage. The climate was changing, even then. The rain falls harder now. The street outside is a small river, moving south, controlled by the drains, finding its way to the lowland basin. The lamps in the windows hold. You stand in the doorway listening to rain on brick. It sounds like a hand rubbing across a drum, low, continuous, filling the air the way music fills a room. You could sleep to this sound. Most people in this city tonight will. The rain is not a threat, not yet. Tonight it is only rain. The rain eases before midnight. The streets drain completely within the hour, another small miracle of planning that the city performs so reliably it has ceased to be remarkable to anyone who lives here. You return to the citadel, drawn back to the question you have been carrying since late afternoon. Who governed this city? The evidence says, no single person. This is the conclusion that a growing number of archaeologists are beginning to reach, carefully, tentatively, with all the caveats of a discipline that knows how often conclusions must be revised. The evidence from the cemeteries, no burial dramatically richer than others, suggests the absence of hereditary dynasty. The evidence from the architecture, no palace, no king's hall, suggests the absence of a central royal authority. The evidence from the weights and measures, perfectly standardized across 1,000 kilometers, suggests some form of coordination so thorough it borders on the miraculous. And what creates that kind of coordination without a king? Perhaps an assembly, a council, a group of elders or specialists or representatives who made decisions collectively and enforced them through the machinery of civic pride rather than the machinery of royal command. Perhaps the priest-king figure you sat with tonight is one such person, not a ruler, but a speaker, not a king, but a convener. Some researchers go further. They use a word tentatively, carefully, aware of how provocative it is, that you might recognize. Democracy. Not in the Greek sense. Athens would not invent its version for another 2,000 years, and that version excluded women and enslaved people extensively. But in the original sense, decision-making distributed among people rather than concentrated in one. The city as a shared project rather than a single person's property. If they are right, if the Indus Valley was in any meaningful sense governed by something resembling collective decision-making, then it predates Athens by 2,000 years and operated at a scale Athens never approached. 1 million people, governed by agreement. This is not certain. It may never be certain. The script remains unread. The records, if they exist, remain silent. The Harappans did not write their constitution on a temple wall or carve their laws into stone in the way Hammurabi did. They simply built the city, and the city worked. Maybe the city was the argument. Maybe every standardized brick, every clean drain, every identical weight was a kind of law, not written in symbols but embedded in practice. A law so thoroughly agreed upon that it became invisible. The rain has stopped. The street below the citadel reflects the returning stars. You look at the city, at the grid of streets and the warm windows and the river beyond, and you think, whatever they were, whatever they called themselves, they made something that worked for 1,000 years, without a pharaoh, without a Caesar, just people and brick and water. And then the question they leave open, why in the end did they leave? That answer is still coming. The Saraswati River, the great river of the Vedas, sister river of the Indus, sacred beyond measure in the texts that will one day be written by the people who come after, is doing something slow and catastrophic that no one in Mohenjo-daro can see. It is moving. Rivers move. This is not a surprise to geologists or to anyone who has watched a river long enough. Tectonic activity, centuries of sediment deposition, changes in gradient. Rivers meander, they shift. The great rivers of South Asia have always been restless. The Saraswati is drying at the headwaters and shifting its course. Over decades, over generations, over centuries, the change is irreversible. A river that once watered the fields of hundreds of Indus Valley settlements, that connected trading cities along its banks, that carried the boats between markets. That river is becoming something smaller, then something seasonal, then something that appears only as a ghost in the landscape, a dried bed, a low area where nothing grows quite the same way. The cities along the Saraswati do not die at once. They adjust. People move. Trade routes shift. Some settlements shrink. Some grow briefly as refugees from the drying east arrive, looking for the city's water and grain. But the system that worked so well for so long was calibrated to a world that is changing. You do not know this tonight. No one in Mohenjo-daro tonight knows this. What they know is that this year's monsoon was adequate, the grain stores are full, the weights are still accurate, and the drains still work. But out on the eastern plains, a farmer who has lived beside the Saraswati for 40 years is noticing that the summer flow is lower this year than last. He has noticed this for 3 years in a row. He does not have the word for climate change. He has a word for drought. He has a word for worry. He has started saving grain longer than he used to. You stand on the citadel in the deep quiet after the rain, and the river below you, the Indus, steady and certain, still moves west toward the sea. It will move west for centuries more. It will still be there when archaeologists arrive in 1922 and begin to dig. But the world the Indus River waters is already, invisibly, beginning to change. The city sleeps, unaware. The stars continue, the drains drain, the grain stores hold, and very far to the east, a farmer saves a little more grain than last year and does not sleep as well as he once did. This is not a scene from tonight. This is a scene from 400 years later, from the same city, the same streets, but in the slow final chapter. The part that archaeologists read in the layers of soil, like a sentence that trails off. The streets are narrower, not because the city planners decided to narrow them, but because houses have been added to the street edges, small modifications made without the civic coordination that once kept the grid clean. Someone needed another room, someone else needed a wall. The modifications added up. The drains are less well maintained. Some have blocked and been cleared imperfectly. A smell in one district, faint but persistent, that was not here before. The standardized bricks, for the first time in centuries, are not all the same size. New sections of wall show variation, as if the network of workshops and quality checks that produced the standard brick has partially dissolved. The granary on the citadel is still operating, but the records, the clay tablets pressed with the Indus script, show, if anyone could read them, that the stores are replenished more slowly, that some years the stores do not reach full. Families are arriving from the east. They bring their tools and their clay toys and their seals and the knowledge of their trades. They are welcomed. This is, after all, a city that did not build walls to keep people out. But the city is crowded in ways it was not designed for. In the residential quarter, a house that was one family's is now two. The courtyard has been halved. The workshop that made beads has converted part of its space to sleeping quarters. The great bath is still maintained, still used. But around its edges, the careful upkeep of earlier centuries is fraying. A replaced brick that does not quite match the original. A water channel that runs a little less cleanly. The city is not falling, it is adjusting. But adjustment, when it continues for long enough, becomes something else. And slowly. Not because of invasion, not because of fire or plague or conquest, but because of river and rain, and the irreducible logic of a changing climate pressing against a system calibrated for stability. The people of Mohenjo-daro begin to do the thing that humans have always done when a place stops working. They begin to leave. Not in panic, not all at once, quietly, deliberately, in the way of a people who built their civilization on competence rather than drama. They pack their tools and their weights and their bangles and their seals. They load the boats. They follow the trade routes east and south and north to smaller settlements that are still viable, still connected to working water. The streets do not empty in a day. They empty over 100 years. Slowly the lamps go dark. We return to tonight. To the family in the house with the two-story courtyard and the kitchen drain and the children who argued over the toy cart. They are asleep now. The lamps are out. Through the high window of the upper floor, a rectangle of sky shows stars, and the stars are very bright, and the city below them is quiet in the deep way of a city that has settled fully into night. The younger child is asleep on his mat, the toy cart beside him, not held, but close, within reach if needed. The older child is asleep on her back with her arms at her sides, serious even in sleep. The mother sleeps with the particular stillness of someone who will be fully awake within an instant if either child makes a sound. The father sleeps on his side, facing the window. In the courtyard below, a cat has come in from the street. The city has cats, as every city with grain stores must have cats, and is washing its face on a low stone near the door. The cat finishes, considers the courtyard, and decides on a corner near the water jar, where it curls into a shape that expresses total satisfaction with the arrangement of the universe. This family will not be here in 400 years. Not because they die badly, not because anything happens to them in particular. They will grow older, and the children will grow up and have children of their own. And those children will grow up in a city that is slowly, almost imperceptibly, becoming less than it was. And one generation, 1 year, one specific season, will pack the household and go. They will leave the kitchen drain. They will leave the courtyard. They will leave the city's extraordinary system of standardized bricks and covered channels in the Great Bath and the grain stores and the citadel and the undeciphered seals and the streets that run at perfect right angles to each other. They will carry their weights and their bangles and their carved seals and their toy cart. The cart travels east in someone's basket to a smaller settlement by a river that still runs. It is used by a child in that settlement for a few years, and then it is broken, and the wheels are kept because terracotta wheels that still turn are useful, and the body is lost. Somewhere in a settlement in Rajasthan or Gujarat, in a soil layer from roughly 1700 BCE, there are two wheels from a toy cart that once rolled across a rooftop in Mohenjo-daro while a child made rumbling sounds with his mouth. We have not found them yet. The family sleeps. The cat sleeps. The city breathes. Outside, the Indus River moves west, as it always has. It does not know it is carrying the last water of a world. The first excavators arrived at Mohenjo-daro in 1922. They dug carefully, layer by layer, through 4,000 years of silt and silence. They found the streets, still measurably straight, still meeting at right angles. They found the Great Bath, still waterproof. They found houses with rooms and courtyards and kitchen drains that connected to the city drain. They found beads and weights and pottery and seals and copper tools and the tiny bronze figure of a girl with her chin lifted and one hand on her hip. And on a doorstep, not in a burial, not in a storage jar, not in any place of deliberate preservation, a small terracotta cart, just sitting there, as if set down for a moment by someone going inside who would come back for it. They did not come back. The cart sat on the doorstep for 4,000 years. The wheels still turned when the excavators lifted it. You hold that image for a moment. The cart that still turns. The civilization that left no palace and no war monument and no king's name but left, in a doorstep in the ruins, a child's toy with working wheels, functioning after 40 centuries exactly as intended. The Harappans were extraordinary engineers of the ordinary. They solved the problems of daily life with a completeness and a care that civilizations 3,000 years younger had not yet matched. Clean water, waste management, public bathing, standardized trade, a city plan that prioritized function over spectacle. They gave the world cotton, perhaps yoga, the seated figure found on seals in what looks like a meditative posture, recurs often enough to suggest a practice. Perhaps the concept of standardized weights and measures as the basis of honest trade. Certainly they gave the world evidence that a civilization does not require a conqueror at its center in order to function. These are not small gifts. They are simply quiet ones. Like the city itself, not announced in trumpets, not recorded in victory inscriptions, not visible from a distance the way a pyramid announces itself. You have to go looking for Mohenjo-daro. You have to dig. You have to learn to read absence as eloquently as presence. And then it opens, layer by layer, until you are standing on a street that was carefully planned 4,500 years ago by people who cared deeply, practically, specifically about whether the rain drained away and whether the grain was weighed fairly and whether the children had toys with wheels that turned. The doorstep is empty now. The cart is in New Delhi, in the National Museum, next to the dancing girl. They are good company for each other. Before we let the Indus sleep, let me tell you what it left behind. Cotton, the thread you wear against your skin tonight, was first cultivated in the Indus Valley. Over 4,000 years ago, someone in Mohenjo-daro looked at a cotton plant and thought, I can make this into something soft, something wearable, something gentle. That thread reached Mesopotamia, then Egypt, then Rome, then the entire world. The decimal system, the way you count, the way every computer on Earth calculates, traces back in part to the Indus standardized weight system. Ratios of 1, 2, 5, 10, 20, 50. Clean, logical, universal. Some historians believe the concept of municipal planning, the idea that a city should be designed, not just grown, began here on these grids, along these streets, beside these drains. And yoga, possibly. The Pashupati seal shows a figure seated in what looks unmistakably like a meditative posture, legs folded, back straight, eyes half closed. Someone, 4,000 years ago, sat like that and breathed, just like you are breathing now. Imagine the city at night, not the ruin, not the excavation site, the city as it was, 2,000 families asleep, the great bath empty and still, moonlight lying flat across the water, the citadel dark, the granary silent, wheat sealed behind thick brick walls, a dog somewhere curling tighter against the cool night air, a child turning in sleep, one hand still gripping a small clay cart, and above it all, the stars. The same stars you can see tonight if you step outside, burning over the flat rooftops of the lower city, over the streets that run north and south, over the drains that carry the city's life quietly underground. The Indus River breathes in the distance, low, slow, steady. Breathe with it now, in, through the nose, hold for just a moment, and out, slow all the way out, good. Again, the city sleeps. The merchants sleep, the craftsmen sleep, the children sleep. And 4,000 years later, you are here, breathing, resting, letting this ancient place hold you gently as you drift. She is 11 centimeters tall, bronze, 4,000 years old, standing in the National Museum in New Delhi, behind glass, in air-conditioned silence. Her right hand rests on her hip. Her left arm, heavy with bangles from wrist to shoulder, hangs easy at her side. She is looking at something we cannot see. She is not afraid. She has survived the end of her civilization, the collapse of her city, the silence of 3,000 years underground, the shock of being found again, the journey to a museum, the gaze of millions of eyes. And still, she stands like that, easy, balanced, at rest inside herself. That is where you're going now, not away from the world, into the still center of it. Your body is heavy, your breath is slow, the sounds around you are far away. Somewhere in the dark, the dancing girl stands with her hand on her hip and her bangles catching no light at all. The Indus Valley sleeps, the great